Hello, my name is Jacqueline Pollauf, and today I'm going to be talking about marking pedals in music. This is actually the third video in a mini-series about this topic, and marking pedals in music is all about the intellectual side of keeping track of the pedals and deciding when is best to move them throughout a piece of music. So I'm not going to be demonstrating anything on the harp. I'm not going to be showing or talking about anything with the physical motion of moving the pedals. Instead, we're just going to be looking at examples from written music and discussing conventions around marking the pedals with those. And for this video, I will assume that you already know quite a bit about the pedals and how they function. If you do not, I have a couple of videos about that topic, and I'll put some links below in the description. And then I'm also going to assume that you've either already watched the previous two videos or that you're very familiar with how pedal charts and pedal changes work in straightforward situations. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about a lot of kind of, I guess, slightly unusual situations with marking pedals, such as when you need to mark with an enharmonic equivalent, or marking a pedal where your left foot is on the E pedal, or marking things with repeats, all kinds of slightly unusual situations like this, and showing some examples of written music and how you would go about marking your pedals for these various situations. Let's begin by talking about repeats in music, which can sometimes add a bit of complexity for marking pedals. As an example, we have here the Aria and Requiem by Gottfried Kirchhoff, transcribed for the harp by Marcel Grandjany. And this has quite a straightforward repeat. You would just play along through the first two lines and then do that once again. And the question is whether any pedals need to happen just one of those times through, rather than pedals that happen both times through. So the easiest way to determine that is to just kind of think it through. We're starting here with our opening pedal chart. We'll be playing along, make a few pedal changes here, and then when we come here and go back, we could, in this example, just compare where the pedals are at the end of this bar to the opening pedal chart. And we have a B natural which matches, but we have an A natural which does not match the A flat that we need. So therefore, we have to add an A flat pedal to this measure just for the second time through. And the way that most people mark that is they put the pedal in parentheses. So we could just draw the A flat in parentheses, and a lot of people add something like second time just to make it very clear for themselves. So anytime you have a repeat, could be a repeat like this, or a first ending, second ending situation, or perhaps a DC L coda. It's always important to think through the pedals with the repeats and see if there are any pedals that just happen once, and if there are, to mark them in a way that makes it clear when you move those pedals and when you do not. Next, let's talk about moving the E pedal with the left foot, which is an unusual situation, but it does come up from time to time. Normally the E pedal is moved with the right foot as it's on the right side of the harp, but once in a while in really demanding pedal situations, harpists will move their left foot over to the right side just to move that E pedal. And there's a specific way to write that in with the pedal markings to show it, and so that it's very clear for the harpist. Our example here is George Gershwin's second prelude, my own transcription. And you can see everything is marked for the first couple of lines. And then when we come here to this third line, first beat, that's where the left foot on E comes up. And the way that you mark it is we would write our A sharp pedal, that's the one that's happening with the right foot. And then stacked underneath it, I'm going to put the E natural pedal to show that the two are happening at the same time. And then all you do is you just put a box around the E pedal. And that's the signal that the opposite foot from usual will be moving that pedal. And the second beat, actually both pedals go back, so we would have an A natural, E sharp, and again you would just put a box around the E pedal. So actually it's quite straightforward, the marking for that situation. Oh, and I should say that when I play this, I do have all of my pedals printed in the music using my music notation software. But just for an example, I wanted to show how you would write it in, so I printed out a clean copy for this. Next, let's talk about a couple of scenarios where it seems like there are too many pedals to move in too short of a time. For an example, here we have Absidioles by Bernard Andrès, and this is a piece with a lot of different sections to it, and generally between the sections there are quite a few pedal changes. So to illustrate this, I've added a couple of pedal charts. This is where the pedals are ending this first section, and this is where they need to be for the second section. So you can see there's quite a few pedal changes between those two pedal charts. In fact, there's 5 of them. The do pedal needs to move on the left side, and then all 4 of the pedals on the right side need to move. And sometimes when students first encounter something like this, they'll bring their music in and they'll have written all 5 pedals in a clump, maybe like right here. And that's not terribly useful, both because no one can move 5 pedals simultaneously, and also because the goal with marking pedal changes is to be very precise, to show exactly rhythmically when the pedals are going to change, and then move them that way every time to build up muscle memory with the feet. So generally the thing to do in this type of scenario is to think about when the pedal needs to be moved and kind of plot it out very logically. So we could start with the do pedal. The do pedal is in flat. It needs to be moved to natural, and the moment that we need to have it moved to natural is right away. This second note of the second section is a do natural pedal, so we'll go ahead and mark that one right off. Now if we keep scanning along, we're fine for this first measure with our pedals, but then when we come to the second measure, all of a sudden we need to have 3 pedals moved at once. We need the mi in sharp, the so in sharp, or I'm sorry, the so in natural, and the la in sharp. So of course we cannot move all 3 of those at once. We need to move them one at a time because they're all pedals with the right foot. But luckily we aren't playing any of those pitches in the previous measure, so we can just arrange them leading into that measure. So we'll put the mi sharp here, then the next beat will be the sol natural, and then we'll squeeze in the la sharp right on that first beat. So that just leaves the fa sharp pedal, and we actually don't need that until down on this line. So maybe we'll go ahead and put it on the 4th beat here. So now we've taken the 5 pedals, and rather than having them all be a bit of a jumble, they're nicely spaced out and match what the music is asking. You might notice that Andrès has some pedals printed in, which are the same pedals that we were just writing, but I tend to find that if they're kind of scattered about like this with one in the middle and then a couple up top, it's not terribly useful. Also, this is not very rhythmic, so usually I just rewrite those and cross out that and read my own markings to make it more clear for myself when I'm moving the pedals. Our next few examples will all involve enharmonic equivalents. So before turning to those, I wanted to take a moment to do an overview of enharmonic equivalents. Now you might find this perfectly straightforward, but many people find enharmonic equivalents a bit confusing. And since they're so important to these complex pedal scenarios, I just wanted to make sure that everything was clear. So the way an enharmonic equivalent works is that within music generally, there are 2 ways of notating the same pitch quite frequently. So for example, here we have a C sharp and a D flat. Those are written differently, but they both sound the same. And on most instruments, they're also played the same way. For example, on the piano, I could play a C sharp with the C sharp key, and then if I wanted to play the D flat, I would play the exact same key, no change. But on the pedal harp, we're very unusual because we would actually play these in 2 different ways, although they would still sound the same. So you could take your C string, put your C pedal in sharp and play a C sharp, or you could take your D string, put your D pedal in flat and play a D flat. And that ability becomes quite important in complex pedal situations. So this is just an overview of all of the enharmonic equivalents. If you have trouble remembering all of this, one way to think of it is that there's only 3 pitches that do not have an equivalent: the D natural, G natural, and A natural. So if you're playing anything other than those 3 pitches, there is always a second way to play the same pitch. One place that many composers use enharmonic equivalents is within glissandos. Now sometimes a glissando is diatonic, meaning it just matches the key signature, but frequently composers will use some enharmonic equivalents to make really interesting sounding glissandos. This example is Carlos Salzedo's very famous Song in the Night, filled with all kinds of interesting glissandos. We're going to look at the one right here on line 3. And Salzedo has this notated very clearly. He's just showing all of the pitches with accidentals as needed. He also has a pedal chart and pedal markings printed throughout, so you could follow those to come up with the same pitches. But we'll just go ahead and add a pedal chart for practicing purposes in case you wanted to start right here. So as it says, we need a D flat, C flat, B natural, and then an E natural, F sharp, G flat, A flat. And the F sharp and G flat are enharmonic equivalents, as are the B natural and C flat. And that's what makes the glissando sound great. Here we have a similar but slightly more complex scenario. This is Henriette Renié's Angelus, and it opens with a couple of glissandos here, and both of them involve a lot of enharmonic equivalents. We'll go ahead and look at the first one here. So the interesting thing about the way Renié has notated this is that she is showing it from the most theoretically correct stance possible, which was common in that time period, less common in modern music. So if you look closely, you can see that we have 2 G flats in a row, then an E flat, then 2 D flats in a row, 2 B flats in a row, etc. And of course, it's not possible to play 2 G flats in a row with a glissando on the same string. Instead, what you have to do is you have to play 1 with the G flat string, 1 with the F sharp string, and so forth. For the 2 D flats, we'd play 1 with the D flat string, 1 with the C sharp string. So she is showing all of the enharmonic equivalents, but it takes a bit more work to kind of puzzle this out and figure out what the pedals should be. Renié does have a little bit of helpful text over here showing how your pedals should be set at the start, that your Fa would be in sharp, La sharp, Do sharp, everything else would match the key signature. So we'll go ahead and draw in a pedal chart showing Re flat, Do sharp, C flat, and then Mi flat, Fa sharp, So flat, La sharp. So this now matches what she has there, and then also in a roundabout way matches the notation as well. Sometimes within a piece of music you just see a glissando with all sorts of double notes like this, no helpful text, and then you really have to take some time to think it through and make sure that your pedals are matching what's intended. Another specialty scenario that involves playing pitches on strings other than the ones that are shown is that of the double flat and double sharp. This rarely comes up. Again, it tends to be in older music rather than newer music, but once in a while you see it, and we can use the same piece here as an example of the double flat. So right here in this measure, we have a whole note B, and there's this symbol ahead of it, which looks like 2 flat signs kind of smooshed together, which is the official notation actually for the double flat. And a double flat just means that you lower the note by 2 half steps or 1 whole step, rather than with a regular flat where you just lower it by a single half step. So usually the easiest way to think of this is to think of a piano keyboard. So you could have the key B, and then you could lower it 1 half step to B flat, and then you could lower it a 2nd half step to A natural. So a B double flat equals A natural. And again, this seems awfully convoluted that Renié has written B double flat rather than A natural, but it was the convention of the time. So whenever you have a double flat or a double sharp within a piece of music, you always have to play it on a different string, and frequently it requires a pedal change as well. The most common way to show all of this in markings is to circle the note that's going to be played on a different string. So we could just circle that, and then we could go ahead and add our A natural pedal. Well, maybe we'll make it a La natural because we've been in solfege. So we'll put the La natural in the previous measure. So that's a double flat. For an example of a double sharp, we turn to the opera Salome by Richard Strauss. And Strauss loved complex and convoluted harmonies. So it wasn't too difficult to find an example of a double sharp within his music. You can see that everything's marked for the first several lines here, and there are a lot of pedals because Strauss's harmonies are so chromatic. And then when we come to this final line, we have the first pitch, the C, has a little tiny X in front of it, which is the symbol for the double sharp. And just like double flats, all double sharps have to be played on a different string. So a C double sharp is actually a D natural. So we'll go ahead and circle it to show that it's going to be played with a different string. And then I'm just going to write the D natural pedal underneath it since our D pedal is currently in sharp. For our last example today, we're going to look at something a little bit more complex with enharmonics. Now, in our previous couple of examples, we were playing notes on different strings because the composer intended it. But there was also this very large area of playing something on a different string, not because the composer intends it, but because you, the harpist, are choosing to do so. And there are many reasons that you might choose to do so. One is to make the pedals easier, maybe just to spread them out more or to divide them up onto the two sides to make them a bit easier. Sometimes you might choose to do this because of the resonance. Maybe you're hearing something change when you're moving the pedal, even if physically you have enough time to move it. Another reason is to change the shape of the chord or arpeggio and make it fit into the hand a bit more. This is a really large area, all of these subjective reasons for playing something on a different string. I think I could make an entire video just about this one topic. But we're going to look at this example here. This is Fauré's Requiem, and this is an excerpt from the Sanctus, where the harp is playing this 16th note accompanimental pattern for much of the movement. And everything is marked all throughout, and then when we come into the last line here, we have a bit of a sticky situation. So I added a little pedal chart just to show where everything is. So all of the pedals are a natural with the exception of the E flat and F sharp. And we're playing in F sharp, A natural, D natural, F sharp for the entire bar. And then in this next bar, we have 3 pedal changes at once, an F natural, A flat, and B flat. Now the B flat isn't a problem because we're not playing any Bs here, so we could either back it up or move it right on the downbeat. But the F and the A pose a couple of problems. For one thing, we're playing them. We're playing an F sharp, A natural, F sharp here, and then they need to change immediately. So we only have a 16th note between that final F sharp and that initial F natural. And then they're also on the same side of the harp. So it'd be very challenging to play the F sharp and then move the F natural pedal late enough not to hear the resonance change, but soon enough to have a nice clean F natural, and then hop the foot over to the A flat and move it all just within the space of a couple of 16th notes. So this is the kind of situation where an enharmonic solution makes a lot of sense. And there are multiple ways you could do this because we have so many enharmonics at our disposal. You could play the F natural with an E sharp, you could play the A flat with a G sharp, you could play this F sharp with a G flat. There's all kinds of choices, but I think what we'll do is we'll play this F natural with an E sharp. So we'll go ahead and put in an E sharp pedal in the previous bar, and we can move the E sharp early because there are no E's being used in this measure. Then we'll go ahead and circle these F naturals to show that we're going to play them on a different string. And then we'll also move the B flat pedal back here for this downbeat octave. And then we can go ahead and just move a single pedal when we come to this bar, the A flat. So there we have an elegant enharmonic solution to this difficult pedaling situation. As always, I hope that you've enjoyed this video and you've gotten some useful information and helpful tips about marking your pedals in these unusual situations. Hopefully also we've covered enough kind of different types of situations that if you have something similar but not quite the same within your music, this will give you some tools for how to go about figuring out your particular situation and your particular preferences for marking pedals. Thank you so much for watching, as always.